Okay, alrighty. In the last video, the engine was ready to test fire. The engine turned over, nothing. Not even a pop. Turn the ignition on, fuel pump primes, fuel pressure gauge shows pressure, so we pull the fuel pump relay, test the spark is good. Fuel relay back in, try again, nothing. Not smelling any fuel. Give it another go, a little bit of engine start, sort of tries, but starter motor seems weak, kicks back on some attempts. Because I used engine start, it was no longer possible to notice that there was no gasoline smell, so I wasted some time on the starter motor, only to find that its armature looked almost new and the brushes were, well, they are full length. Next, I focused on the fuel injectors, even replacing the primary injectors. Because I've made up the Power of C harness and the wiring for the boat, I was pretty convinced that I'd done something wrong and it was completely my fault and just a fluke that it ran before. I did a lot of research and it didn't actually solve the problem, but it did help improve some of the wiring I'd done earlier, mostly the earthing, which also fixed the tired cranking that I was having. But with each failed attempt, I started thinking the ECU wasn't getting the right signal from the crank sensors, which again was another dead end. At this point I felt like I'd hit a wall, completely stumped. The conclusion: engine has compression, spark and fuel, but not enough fuel. And if I add more fuel in the Power of C, it still only shows 2% injected duty cycle when cranking. And then if I add even more fuel, it still does, like tons of fuel, it stays on 2%. And it should be like 15 or 20% on cranking. So many weeks have been wasted trying to figure out why it won't start. And then it's like I've given up and I just reset the Power of C, turn the ignition on, press the start button, and it starts. Now the realization that most of this wasted time and effort is completely my fault. So, before the transom was repaired and we started the engine for the first time, I took a copy of my RX-7's Power of C and loaded it to the boat's Power of C. The only thing I needed to change to test was the primary to 1000 and secondary to 1725, the transition percentage and the transition millisecond. And the numbers that I'd used had worked before. Engine ran, had some issues. Now it should finish setting up the injectors on the data logger. Skim over the Power of C FD manual just to refresh my memory. And that number I need to change for the injector pulse correction. I just divide the original injector size with the new size and I get 0.5. So assuming I just add that last piece to the puzzle and I'm done, then I pack everything up, disassemble the boat for the transom repair, and I don't give it another thought. So when it all goes back together, it's ready to run. Now, if I had read the manual properly, I would probably have noticed that it goes on to imply that my answer of 0.55, that was rounded by a data logger to 0.5, should have been 55 or 55%. My twisted logic would be that number 0.5 is what the ECU would multiply the base fuel map for the primary injectors to get the correct duty cycle, which is why I was getting 2% injector duty instead of the 15 to 20%, because it was just the wrong number. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with the pulling of the engine out, but we pulled the engine out, completely cleaned and re-glued the sump, torqued all the bolts. Hopefully this time we don't have any leaks. Also, I've taken one of the springs out of this because there was just too much tension before, and I think we're good now. Before the engine goes back in, I need to remove my injector tester, which didn't make a lot of difference, and I need to change some of the wiring that's in the boat so the coils have the earths to the block instead of the way they were, which seems to be incorrect. Other than that, got the heater running to try and set the stuff off, get it back in, fire it up, and hopefully no more roadblocks. We can get on with sea trials, starting it, tuning it, probably in the reverse order. But I also found a factory knock sensor, so I can try out the Bosch one, which is probably going to be the wrong frequency for Power FC, but I also have Mazda knock sensor, so we can at least have some sort of knock sensor going on. Okay, we're all back in. Need to make some mods to the computer again, and then we can hopefully just fire it up again.